Today we're jumping straight into the 1892 U.S. presidential election.
Yeah, a really fascinating one.
We've got some great insights pulled from the 1892 U.S. presidential election showdown script, which should really help bring this moment to life for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to really get 1892, you kind of have to set the scene, right? Picture America then.
Okay.
You've got massive industrial growth happening, huge amounts of immigration, and it's the peak of the Gilded Age.
Yeah.
So, incredible wealth.
Right. But alongside pretty significant poverty, too.
Exactly. There were these real tensions simmering under the surface, things like economic inequality, the labor rights movement getting started.
Yeah.
It was a volatile time.
Okay, so our mission here for this deep dive is to get past just the basics. We want to really understand who the key players were, what the big arguments were about, and maybe why this election, still has some surprising relevance today. And the immediate hook is that it's a rematch, isn't it? Between the incumbent Republican Benjamin Harrison and the former president Democrat Grover Cleveland.
That's right. They'd already gone head-to-head in 1888.
And wasn't that the election where Cleveland actually won the popular vote?
Yeah, he did. Won the popular vote, but lost in the Electoral College to Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
So, heading into 92, there's this built-in narrative already, unfinished business, you could say.
Right. Let's start with Harrison, then, the guy in the White House.
Okay. Benjamin Harrison. Republican president. He was a Civil War veteran.
And he had pedigree, right? Grandson of President William Henry Harrison.
Exactly. Political family. And his big thing, policy-wise, was the protective tariff. He was a huge advocate.
Believing it protected American industries, American jobs, that was the core Republican idea.
That was the argument, yeah. Republicans genuinely felt these high tariffs were essential. Protect domestic manufacturing, keep wages up. That was the thinking. Make imported goods pricier so people buy American.
And personality-wise, the source mentions he wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy. Handshake of a dead fish.
Huh, yeah, apparently. More formal, reserved, definitely not a backslapping campaigner type.
So he really embodied that sort of high-tariff, pro-business Republican stance.
He did. His personality, his policies, they fit together, and, they appealed to that core Republican-based people who saw government's role as actively helping business grow through things like tariffs.
Okay, now shift to Grover Cleveland, former president, Democrat, looking for that second term.
Yep, trying to get back in after losing to Harrison in '88.
And he's described as a classic bourbon Democrat. What does that mean exactly?
Basically, it refers to the more conservative wing of the Democratic Party back then, especially strong in the South. They generally favored fiscal conservatism, limited government, states' rights.
So anti-tariff.
Strongly anti-tariff. And a big believer in just less government overall.
His personality seems like a total contrast to Harrison's, blunt, honest. The source mentions his hefty physique.
Yeah, he was apparently quite large and known for being very direct. Maybe not always diplomatic, but seen as honest.
Yeah.
And there's that famous quote of his.
Oh, right. Though the people support the government.
The government should not support the people.
Yeah.
That really sums up his whole philosophy, doesn't it? Minimal government intervention.
It really does. So he's pushing for lower tariffs, less government meddling in the economy. Two very different guys, two very different visions.
Absolutely. But, and this is crucial, 1892 wasn't just about these two.
Ah, right, because there was this other major force emerging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to the People's Party. Or, as they're better known, the Populists.
The Populists. Now, they didn't just spring up out of nowhere, did they? There was a base for this.
Oh, definitely not overnight. They grew out of things like the Farmers' Alliances. There was this widespread feeling among farmers and also industrial workers.
That they were getting a raw deal.
Pretty much. Squeezed by debt, low prices for crops, high railroad rates, low wages in factories. They felt the system was rigged against them and that the Democrats and Republicans weren't listening.
And the source calls them genuinely radical for the time.
And they were. Their platform was pretty far-reaching.
Okay, so what were they actually proposing? What made them radical?
Well, several key things. First, the free coinage of silver. This was huge for them.
Explain that a bit. Why silver?
The idea was inflation, basically. What? They wanted the government to mint unlimited silver coins alongside gold. This would increase the money supply, cause inflation, and make it easier for debtors, especially farmers, to pay off their loans because the value of the money would be less, while crop prices might rise.
Okay, interesting. What else?
They wanted a graduated income tax. You earn more, you pay a higher percentage.
Which we have now, but was radical then.
Very. Also, direct election of senators. Back then, state legislatures picked them.
Wow.
An 8-hour workday for laborers.
Yeah.
And this was a big one.
Yeah.
Government ownership of railroads and telegraphs.
Whoa. Government ownership. That is radical for the 1890s, challenging the whole laissez-faire idea.
Completely. It suggested a much, much bigger role for the government in the economy than most people accepted then.
And who is their candidate? Who led this charge?
A guy named James B. Weaver. He was a former Union general, apparently a really charismatic speaker, good at firing up the crowds.
And their support base was these groups who felt left behind, farmers, laborers.
Exactly. The source really points to farmers in the South and West feeling exploited by banks, by railroads charging crazy rates, by monopolies, and then urban workers dealing with low-pay, rough conditions.
They saw the Populists as their voice.
Yeah, a real grassroots movement. They felt the two main parties just served, corporate interests, the wealthy elite. Their slogan kind of said it all. Equal rights to all, special privileges to none.
It's interesting how some of those feelings about inequality still resonate, isn't it?
It really is. Different context, but similar anxieties sometimes.
So you've got these three forces, Harrison, Cleveland, and Weaver with the Populists. How did the campaign itself play out differently for each?
Very different styles.
Mm.
Harrison, his wife, was quite ill, so he mostly stayed home. Did a front porch campaign, they called it. Gave speeches from his home in Indianapolis.
Okay, low-key. What about Cleveland?
Also relatively restrained, for a presidential campaign. Not super active, out on the stump constantly.
Or the Populists?
Oh, they were the opposite. All action. Weaver and others were out there holding big rallies, traveling, really trying to energize their base. They genuinely believed they could break the mold, challenge the two-party grip.
And the big arguments. Still tariffs.
Tariffs were absolutely central, still the main dividing line between Republicans and Democrats.
Republicans saying, high tariffs protect jobs, keep wages high.
Right. And the Democrats, led by Cleveland, saying, no, tariffs are just a hidden tax on everyone. They make goods expensive, and they help monopolies get fat.
And what was the populist angle on tariffs?
They basically said, look, both the old parties are in the pocket of big business. Tariffs, currency, it's all rigged. They argued only their more radical reforms, free silver, government control, income tax, could actually help the average person. They tried to shift the focus.
Were there any, major scandals or specific events during the campaign that really swung things? Or was it mainly these big economic arguments?
It seems it was mostly driven by these broader economic anxieties and the sort of energy of that populist challenge. Not so much one single defining scandal like we sometimes see today. But that populist surge itself was the big event, really. It forced the conversation.
Okay, so the votes are cast, election day happens. What's the result?
Grover Cleveland wins. He beats Harrison pretty decisively.
Wow. So he gets his comeback.
He does. Wins a solid majority of the popular vote and a clear victory in the Electoral College. And like we said, it makes him the only U.S. president ever to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Quite a unique spot in history.
That really is remarkable. But what about the Populists? They obviously didn't win, but did they make a dent?
Oh, a huge dent. More than a dent, really. James Weaver got over 1 million popular votes.
1 million back then.
Yeah, which was over 8% of the total vote. That's significant for a third party. And even better, he actually won 4 states, Colorado, Idaho, Kansas, Nevada, and picked up electoral votes in a couple of others. Total of 22 electoral votes.
22 electoral votes for a third party. That is stunning for that time.
Absolutely stunning. It showed just how deep that discontent ran. It sent a massive signal to the Democrats and Republicans that, hey, a big chunk of the country feels left out and wants fundamental change.
So looking back now, what's the real lasting importance of 1892? Why should we care about it today?
Well, beyond Cleveland's unique comeback story, I think it really throws a spotlight on those deep divisions in American society during the Gilded Age. Social divisions, economic divisions.
Divisions that maybe still echo today in some ways.
You could definitely argue that. And crucially, the populist movement, even though it fizzled out as a party eventually, its ideas didn't disappear. They planted the seeds for a lot of the progressive era reforms that came later.
Right. You mentioned some of the platform earlier. Which ideas specifically ended up happening?
Well, think about it. A graduated income tax. That became the 16th Amendment.
Wow.
Direct election of senators. The 17th Amendment.
Okay.
And the general idea of more government regulation of big business, trying to curb monopolies, protect workers and consumers. That became a major theme of the early 20th century under presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Ideas that were radical populist demands in '92.
So the source saying they won the battle of ideas in the long run seems pretty accurate then.
I think it's spot on. They didn't win the White House, but their core issues, many of their proposed solutions, eventually worked their way into the mainstream and fundamentally changed the country.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that political movements that don't win immediately can still have this huge long-term impact.
Yeah. Exactly. 1892 is just a fantastic case study in how dynamic American politics can be, how quickly things can shift when enough people feel the system isn't working for them. It shows how disruption happens.
Yeah. This deep dive, it really uncovers maybe an underappreciated but truly fascinating chapter in American history. Makes you think about those underlying currents.
It really does. And, it makes you consider how those debates from 1892, tensions over the economy, the role of government, who the system benefits, how they might connect, maybe in different forms, to the conversations we're having right now.
That's a really good point. Well, on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about today's political landscape. Which ideas that seem kind of radical or fringe right now might, decades down the line, become totally accepted mainstream policy, just like those populist ideas did.
Interesting question. A reminder that what seems fixed today might not be tomorrow.
Absolutely.